Balloon Talk, the second edition. Honestly, I did not think I would be doing another Balloon Talk, but you know what? Here we are, Valentine's Day evening. Neither Will or I have a date tonight, and we may be facing an alien invasion. So, what better time to record podcast? Oh my God, where to start? All right, let's do that. Let's do first object first. What more have we learned about the Chinese spy balloon?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of information has come out since we previously spoke. So this is a very big balloon. When we were first talking, I don't think pictures of it had emerged yet. And this thing was pretty massive. I mean, they said the size of a regional airliner or three buses. They said in excess of 2,000 pounds. And it was flying at around 60,000 feet, which is actually kind of at the low end of the spectrum for a high altitude balloon. They can go much higher than that. And so that is one of kind of the weird things that was surprising to me, is that it didn't seem to have any sort of there's like no way that Chinese could have thought that this would stay hidden, right? I mean, you fly this over Montana, like we're gonna notice. People are taking pictures of it with their cell phones. And the other issue thing they've said is that it was equipped with propellers and a rudder for control. So the last time I was talking about how there is the technology to for these things to work without needing any sort of onboard propulsion, but in this case that appears to have not been the case, that they're using kind of more crude methods to steer this balloon. It may just be that there is indeed a balloon gap, and it favors the United States, that they just don't have like the technology that companies here are working with. Or it could also, another theory I have is just because it's such a large payload that they couldn't, payload decreases with altitude, so they might not have just been able to have it kind of go moving up and down to catch winds. And it's a signals intelligence balloon as well. Is another thing that's been confirmed by the U.S. government. Meaning it would collect radar communication signals, that sort of thing, and that's something definitely where a balloon could be quite useful, even compared to satellites. You're within atmosphere, you're below the ionosphere. The ionosphere kind of refracts these signals, and that possibly could have been why it wasn't meant to be inconspicuous in any way. It might have been kind of designed to provoke some sort of reaction, and gather intelligence that way. Or another theory is that, though I find it a little less likely, that it really did malfunction, and it was kind of designed to kind of do this from maybe like just outside U.S. airspace. The United States does something similar where we'll fly aircraft near China, not over China, but kind of near it to collect this kind of stuff. Although I do find that one a little less likely, given that it didn't have very advanced.
Yeah, I mean, this is really one of the mysteries, right? Is like this thing is so big that you have to imagine, there's been all this stuff like the Biden administration says, yeah, we saw Trump ones. We look back at our data and saw that there were Trump overflights. I can't imagine that those ones were as big as this, because it doesn't seem plausible that something of this size and magnitude would not have just been spy. I mean, there are lots of Americans, like people look up on occasion. Yeah, paint it blue, for Christ's sake. I mean, come on, like.
Or I mean, there's things you can do in order that would make even a large object, like kind of what we do with like a B-21 or an F-35. There are things you can do to make it so that it would be difficult to detect on radar. This didn't seem to do any of that.
Let's go one level more in depth about what a balloon signals intelligence balloon could do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm full disclosure, I'm not an expert on signals intelligence, but it's definitely it's kind of understanding what kind of the electronic emissions of your opponent is something that's extremely valuable in when it comes to kind of warfare and it comes to intelligence collection. I mean, you want to know about what their radars are like, what their communications are like. You can do things. If you want to jam them, for example, it's good to have this kind of information ahead of time. Again, why would you send it on a balloon? I think this really is one of those areas where balloons would have certain advantages over satellites. Again, just being closer, just being inside it, inside the atmosphere. Like I said, the ionosphere. It's kind of this part of the upper atmosphere that's been ionized by solar radiation, and that does like kind of refract these signals a little bit. So I think that's that was in one of the papers where I was reading about this, kind of suggested that like this is where balloons would have an advantage. And I believe they were referring to some like kind of test or like demonstration that they did in field exercises where something like 80% of their signals intelligence were coming from balloons. They said they were quite effective at that. So and then on top of that, again, if people if we see it, and if you're doing things, if you're firing radars at them, if you send up an F-22 and the F-22 is like using its radar on the balloon, then it can learn things about the F-22's radar. In this case, the Pentagon is saying they said they took measures to kind of mitigate whatever intelligence they could have gotten from it, but it's absolutely something where depending on how disciplined
it's
we were on
interesting
our
thinking
end,
about
they could have
like
learned a lot.
how much the U.S. government already knew about all this and was sort of tracking and focused on it, and then all of a sudden a Chinese balloon blows off course across the middle of America, and it can no longer be this counter espionage like sophisticated thing, and like you just gotta deal with it and it becomes a national news story, or they just get really surprised and all of a sudden we're looking back at past records and whatnot. And I think sort of exhibit one to the second theory of this not necessarily being something that the U.S. government was tracking is all these other things that America has decided to shoot down over the past 72 hours. Will, what the hell's going on with that?
Yeah, so one thing, to your earlier point, apparently this stuff has been happening for a while. There are at least 3 instances in the Trump administration that we didn't know about at the time, and then we kind of found out through intelligence later. So, when talking about in terms of difficulty to detect, they can be made a lot harder to detect as evidenced by this. But apparently, the U.S. has gotten better at tracking these things. There's reporting that the intelligence community has developed some way of kind of tracking them, but only got it within the last year. And then also NORAD has it's also been reported, and this was confirmed yesterday, that NORAD has adjusted kind of the filters on their radars to kind of like so that the computer doesn't filter out things that like it wouldn't necessarily that they might have kind of gone unnoticed now. So
I just love the idea of there being a dial and they're just like, oh man, these are all just seagulls. Like, don't give me extra work. And now they turn it down, and all of a sudden there are all these spy balloons that show up. But there's still someone that has to go through and cross out the seagulls.
Yeah, and there's been, again, just 3 shoot downs happened in as many days, and NORAD and the U.S. government, they've been careful to not call them balloons. They've been repeatedly calling them objects. The way they're describing them sounds a lot like balloons. They're saying things like they don't see any propulsion and it's floating and like all this other stuff, and that where I'm just like, okay, that sounds a lot like a balloon, guys. But they're at least, and I think Chuck Schumer also said it was said that they're probably balloons, and he'd be getting getting information that isn't public on. He would be. I'm sure he's been briefed on this. So I think these probably are. I'd be willing to bet that they are, but they also haven't been recovered yet. So I think they're out in like we've got people out in like Alaska search and in northern Canada searching for them, and so it may be a little while before they actually confirm that these are balloons or what they are.
So man-made. You're on team man-made, Will.
Oh yeah, I think this probably is not aliens.
Okay.
But if it is, they showed a hell of a time to show up. So.
I mean, three body problem, man. Maybe it's just like the ETO trying to throw us off the tracks. So what's your hypothesis? That sort of NORAD turned down the filters on what to look for and all of a sudden found all these other things in the past few days?
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, one thing to know right off the bat, we don't even assuming they are balloon, we don't know where they're from. We don't know if they're Chinese or it could possibly be Russians or someone else. I mean, there's a recent article talking about like the Russians having their own balloon capabilities. So I think I have kind of three hypotheses on this one. Number one is that this is just a very routine thing that like this stuff kind of happens like all the time, and we just kind of turned down the radar sensitivity, and then suddenly they all kind of showed up, and then we started shooting them down.
So by
another theory,
by a normal thing, jets shooting down stuff is not a normal thing, but stuff flying over America and us not
but
noticing
it's like stuff
okay.
flying over, right? Like if the Chinese are sending like spy balloons like every several times a week before, and then it just like kind of went under our nose, and then now that we're actually looking for it, we're just kind of like, oh my god, there's all these balloons, and then we're saying shoot them down too, where we might not have before. The other hypothesis I have is that the Chinese are kind of like trying to probe our defenses, kind of that they may have sent additional ones, kind of seeing like what would get through, like if there's certain like air like vectors that like might that might not be well covered, or if they send something again, the at least the first object that was or I should say it's the second object, that the one that was shot down in Alaska kind of the week after the initial shoot down. That one they described as smaller, as like the size of a small car. They said it's kind of like lower signature. The most recent one they shot down over Lake Huron, they actually did lose track of it for a little bit. There had been like they had been tracking it over like Montana, and then at one point they were unable to locate it for a time, and then they picked it up again over Lake Huron. That's why they shot it down there and not somewhere else. So that's theory two, and then my third kind of hypothesis on this is that the Chinese kind of looked at this is something that I was kind of worried might happen after the political response. They kind of looked at this and they said, oh, this would be a good way, to kind of get the U.S. to waste air-to-air missiles, and then you have to flight hours. I mean, each one of these shootdowns are involving like multiple planes at a time. It's expensive to fly these planes. They have certain like kind of limited. The airframes have like only a certain amount of hours that they can fly before they start having structural issues. That one I think is probably kind of the least plausible at this point, just given that we've gone a couple days without another one, and you would have to send quite a few over a long period of time for it to kind of have a real effect on the U.S. Air Force. Right now, it's just kind of target practice. So I think more likely it is either just kind of routine surveillance being discovered now, or some attempt to kind of see to test our balloon defense.
Yeah, I mean, that strikes me as particularly far-fetched, just given that, from a sort of diplomatic standpoint, the Chinese government really over the past few months has been reaching out and trying to play nice and, reset relations or whatever. So to have like a rogue corner of the PLA, like be, do a whole, balloon armada to sort of blow up the sort of completely change the trajectory of U.S.-China relations and like, waste missiles in preparation for an invasion of Taiwan sounds like pretty out there stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when I first suggested the idea, talked about the idea that I could do, I said I think it would require U.S.-China relations to get even worse than it is now, if not like an outright war. But that is a scenario I think you do have to consider. Like if there is a Taiwan war or something like that, you do want to think about the potential for this to become kind of like a cost imposing strategy where it's like they send balloons that cost like $100,000 and we shoot $400,000 missiles at it.
Yeah. Let's do a NORAD primer.
So NORAD it stands for North American Aerospace Defense Command. It is a kind of joint U.S. Canada organization where the two countries kind of work together to kind of detect and any sort of kind of objects coming into either country's airspace that we don't want to, and if necessary, defend against it. It's really, more, it kind of started during the Cold War to defend against, Soviet bombers or missiles that might be coming, like, down to nuke the United States. And the reason Canada is such an important part of this is because if you were to like fire, like an ICBM at DC or New York or something like that, it would go over Canada on the way over. This is, people were kind of asking, why do like the Canadian, why did you have like American fighters shooting down, this one of the objects that was over Canada? It's like, well, just because like this is very much like a U.S. Canada thing, and yeah, they have like fighter jets and stuff stationed across bases across like the northern territories, and in this case, with one of the objects that was shot down by the F-22 over Canada, looking at the map, it looked like the F-22 bases were just a little closer than where the Canadian fighter jets were. So yeah, they're a pretty important organization, and I think their importance might be going up a little bit. So probably not a bad time for their budget. So.
Yeah, I don't know how you bet long NORAD, but seems fair enough. Will, any other angles to this we haven't gotten to today of new developments?
I was talking about how they're harder to shoot down than you think, but in most of the cases they've managed to do it in one shot, using these missiles, these short range air to air missiles, the AIM-9X, which is a very advanced missile. Previous instance that I was talking about a lot, they used guns to try to bring it down, and it just took forever. It took like 6 days before it finally came down spite of shooting. I think this time they said they wanted to get it done quickly. They used a missile. The commander of NORAD said he wasn't even sure if it was going to work, but it worked pretty well. The AIM-9X has a very, very advanced guidance system. People mistakenly call it a heat seeker, but it's actually really more of an imaging infrared. It uses kind of the heat contrast rather than so it doesn't need like hot engine exhaust or something to hit something. Granted, in the most recent shoot down, they said their first shot missed. But that was kind of one breaking news, that they had to use 2 missiles and not 1. But that stuff happens. No missile is perfect. It can always, if there's something a little wrong with the guidance system or something like that, that kind of stuff happens. So yeah, it was
$800,000, not $400,000 to shoot down this balloon.
Yeah, so that's would have been okay. So if we're talking,
let's cost it out. Let's cost it out.
Yeah. So in this case, they used. So they flew. So you have the 2 missiles that are like $800,000. they have the F-16, which costs maybe about I think $20,000 an hour to fly. And they use like multiple aircraft were involved. I think that there's like an AWACS, which is a big radar plane. I forget exactly what the cost there is, but I'd imagine it's not exactly low. So yeah, so when you're adding up the cost of all the aircraft involved, the missiles, we're probably looking at more than $1 million to shoot it down. Now, I should also give the caveat that the U.S. military has, like, we fly and we shoot missiles just regularly for training purposes. And I think this, so this is probably stuff that's kind of already budgeted in. It's like the same issue with flyovers. It's like, well, but they're flying for training anyway, and it's like this time they're just flying over a stadium. So I wouldn't worry too much about your tax dollars being wasted. I think most fighter pilots would say they would rather be shooting down surveillance balloons as opposed to the training they normally do. But it could become an issue, kind of going back to the theory of like wasting missiles. It could be an issue hypothetically at some point. So it is something that it is why I'd say we should develop like lasers or something that can do it down that can down a balloon much cheaper.
Yeah, I'm with you. Look, the stories are priceless. Okay, no one's gonna be telling stories at the bar about their training runs, but Top Gun Super Maverick is going to need some new enemies, and I think we just generated them over the past few days. There's been some interesting reporting about the sort of Chinese balloon industrial complex. Can you talk a little about what we've learned so far?
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a recent article about this, Chinese like balloon scientist who's been working on this. Professor Wu has been working on this for, about 2 decades, and like has been involved with a lot of the companies. The U.S. has actually sanctioned a number of companies, like kind of in response to this incident that have been involved. And, we're looking at, private companies, academic institutions. I mean, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of stuff that the Chinese are putting into this and kind of developing this technology. I mean, when you think of what goes into it, there's building the balloons themselves. There's the sensor packages that they involve. There's kind of getting like the weather data for the winds up in the stratosphere. The Chinese, they see this. They've been talking about this for a while as a domain, right? Like they see what they call near space as kind of that area from 20 kilometers in altitude up to about like 100 kilometers. They see that as almost like air, land, sea, space as like a separate kind of domain. And it's something that militarily they're very interested in, and do want to exploit it for a multitude of reasons, but military reasons is definitely one of them.
Yeah, I wonder all those entity listings if it's like they just read the tags on the on the balloon when they I wonder if those entity listings are just them sort of like reading the tags after they fished out the balloon, or because that was a pretty fast turnaround, or maybe there was something brewing on this already, and this kind of goes back to my other theory that, in fact, this has been something that they've been watching for a while, and maybe putting these companies on entity lists. Like, I can't imagine there's a lot of American technology or tech transfer going to Chinese balloon manufacturers to begin with. So perhaps it was more of a, I don't want to say performative, but more demonstrative, right. More of a signaling action that something that the U.S. government really expects is going to materially degrade Chinese balloon performance.
Yeah, well, I'm also just not sure, like, the extent to which we can. I mean, you compare it with like the chip export controls, where the U.S. has so much leverage over that supply chain, and at least for the balloons themselves, like okay, it's like polyethylene. Like, could we cut them off from that? Like, probably not. I don't know too much about the supply chain. I'm gonna guess no. I gotta guess the other things like that helium. Yeah, we are the world's largest helium producer actually, but we're far from the only one. So I don't think we could cut them off from that either. So I don't know. And you consider like again a lot of this is dual use. Do you like do you sanction, do you blacklist everyone who's making like weather balloons? Again, it's like that technology, like that kind of stuff is very similar. If they're doing like balloon internet, like what Google was doing, is that it? I mean, I think really our ability to like to really hurt like the balloon industrial complex as you put it, I think is the one thing is when it comes to AI, I think because there is that kind of AI balloon technology when it comes to navigating the winds, and that stuff is very advanced. So we already have very strict rules on the books that are designed to kind of slow China's AI progress. So I think that's something that probably has an effect, but we've already kind of we've already used that tool. So
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't
I
been a
don't I don't
ton
think
of
there's I
like,
don't think this is didn't do much.
yeah, I mean, I think like coming down the pipeline, there's this idea of some sort of algorithmic regulation around AI and software, and you got to imagine that whatever that line is going to be, it's like for use in, and then they'll have like 20 different fields, like. Yeah, balloon might get thrown on there, given the past few
Mm-hmm.
oh my god days of developments. Um, Russia produces 30% of the world's helium. There's probably enough between the two countries to fill up some balloons.
Yeah,
Not the greatest choke
I'd
point,
imagine.
I would imagine, but it's important. It's good. You gotta cover all your bases here. Just like a little riff from me on what I think this means for U.S.-China relations. The
Mm-hmm.
the political reaction in America to this story. I mean, yes, it's like funny and it has a visual attached to it, but it's been really remarkable to me just how up in arms the sort of media and political class has gotten with respect to this, and I think sort of
Mm-hmm.
that is more illustrative than anything of just how hard it will be for anyone to try to change the direction or trajectory of where U.S.-China relations are heading. And it made me, whether or not this sort of freak out is justified, it did make me a lot more pessimistic than I had been before after coming out of the Bali meeting, where it seemed like the two countries were or the two countries' leaderships at least were interested in potentially putting up some guardrails, doing like crisis communication stuff again, which has kind of been offline for a little while, it seems, and really trying to put a floor on the relationship, which is not seeming less and less in the cards. Just given how freaked out folks have been about all of this, and also there's the question of like, yeah, I mean, it's still a mystery to me why China did this. And it may have just been a fuck up. And they had a balloon and it was 50 miles off the coast or whatever, watching fighter jets train, and it ended up losing power or something, or there was some malfunction. That seems to me to be more plausible than just sending a balloon across America, particularly given the timing. But I don't know. Maybe we'll get some more color on it in episode 3 of Balloon Talk. Final words, Will? What if it's like a garbage bag? Like, could it be a garbage bag? Just like hits the jet stream the right way? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a garbage bag would not give any sort of like radar or any sort of signature that they could track. Um, but there's a lot of stuff up there that could again look like something else, and I hope we're restrained enough that we don't end up wasting lots of money and lots of flight hours on stuff that isn't actually a threat, and that we understand that, hey, like you can't send F-22s up every single time. There might be something.
Any advice you have, Will, for other like young aspiring weapons nerds? What made you who you are?
I guess if I have any advice, I guess it's don't be afraid to embrace a very niche topic.
Will, do you have a top three? What do you want to read better papers on?
I mean, I mean, other than balloons, I think,
Yes.
but one thing, I mean, undersea cables is actually a big one. I know of someone who actually does know a lot about that stuff, and that's something that definitely is important in the, given how like critical they are just for like the communications of the modern world. And I don't think we've like fully kind of done enough work on like, okay, like what are the implications of like if countries were to like cut these cables, and it's like how do we stop them from doing that and stuff like that. Another one, I guess, reusable rockets is something I'd be interested in kind of the defense applications. It's actually something I've been reading about the past couple days. Like, I know there's been a couple articles in War on the Rocks that was like, what if we took like the SpaceX, like a version of the SpaceX like reusable Falcon 9 and just put warheads on it. I think there's issues with the fuel and stuff like that I think would probably make that impractical. But you never know with the way the technology goes. So yeah, those are probably the two. Oh, underwater gliders, actually, another big one that get some attention. They're yeah. It's basically these things that like they essentially glide through the water, and you can get these like they can go very, very far. It's very slow, but they can travel just insanely long distances that way. Yeah. So
And
some of them
they're
will look like
autonomous.
torpedoes, and some of them actually look like gliders. Yeah. Yeah. There's a website I think called ShrikePod that's like talked about this a lot.
Will Camp, thanks so much for being a part of China.
This is your captain.
Of course, thanks for
Prepare
having me.
for takeoff. Would you like to ride in my beautiful balloon? Would you like to glide in my beautiful balloon? We could float among the stars together, you and I. Whoa, we can fly. Whoa, we can fly. I mean, up and away in my beautiful balloon. The world's a nicer place in my beautiful balloon. Don't you know that it wears a nicer face in my beautiful balloon? We can sing a song and sail along the silver sky. Didn't I say we would fly? Yes, we can fly. I mean, up and away in my beautiful balloon. Suspended under a twilight canopy, we'll search the clouds for a star to guide us. If by some chance you find yourself loving me, dig. Now cut it right there now. Now sock it to me, babe. Love is waiting there in my beautiful balloon. Way up in the air in my beautiful balloon. If you'll hold my hand, we'll chase your dreams across the sky.